Jelly Roll has filed for divorce from his wife, Bunnie XO, after nearly 10 years of marriage. Reports are that the decision was mutual. It's a private family matter.
He built his entire public identity around one woman. He tattooed her name across his body. He wept openly in front of cameras while thanking her for saving his life. And then, somewhere between the stadium lights and the silence of an empty tour bus, Jason Bradley DeFord quietly walked into a Nashville attorney's office and began the legal process of ending the marriage that millions of people had come to believe was unbreakable. What you are about to hear is not a gossip column, and it is not a rushed collection of social media speculation. This is an honest, careful reconstruction of what the evidence actually tells us, what the timeline actually means, and what the man himself has been quietly confessing for years to anyone paying close enough attention. The world found out on the 15th of June, 2026. The news did not arrive wrapped in drama or announced through tearful Instagram videos. It simply landed, the way devastating things often do, without warning and without ceremony. Court records filed in Williamson County, Tennessee, revealed that Jelly Roll had initiated divorce proceedings against Bunnie XO, born Elisa DeFord, on the 18th of May. The reason listed was irreconcilable differences. The date chosen as the official end of their marriage was the 9th of May. Those two facts alone, when placed side by side and examined carefully, tell a story that is far more complicated and far more human than any headline has yet managed to capture. Begin with that date. May 9th. Hold it in your mind for a moment, because what happened on that exact day on Bunnie's social media platforms completely reframes the emotional weight of what the paperwork eventually revealed. On the 9th of May, while her husband was privately designating that same calendar date as the moment their marriage ended, Bunnie was online. She posted a warm and tender video of the family preparing for prom. She wrote about her babies. She used the word forever with the ease of a woman who had no reason to believe it was already slipping away. Either she had genuinely no knowledge of what her husband had already decided in his own mind, or she was holding the entire architecture of her life together with steady hands while the foundation quietly gave way beneath her feet. Both possibilities are painful in ways that resist easy description. What is not in question is the deliberateness of the decision he made. Jelly Roll did not file for divorce impulsively. He retained one of Nashville's most prominent divorce attorneys, a legal professional widely known in Tennessee legal circles for guiding high-profile clients through the most sensitive and private dissolutions of marriage. This was a considered, methodical process. He chose the moment, he chose the attorney, and he set the terms of how this story would be told to the public, which is to say he ensured it would barely be told at all. The brief statement released on behalf of both parties described the situation as a mutual decision and a private family matter. That language functions less as an explanation and more as a boundary. It tells you exactly as much as they want you to know, and not a single syllable more. To understand why this ending matters so deeply to so many people, you have to go back to the beginning, because the beginning is one of the most genuinely improbable love stories that American popular culture has produced in the last decade. They met in Las Vegas in the late summer of 2015. He was performing a small show for an audience of roughly 20 people. He was sleeping in a white van that he had given a name to, surviving on $500 gigs, without an apartment or a stable income or anything resembling conventional success. She was working as a high-end escort and happened to be in the same room that night for entirely different reasons. By every external measure, these two human beings had no business becoming a love story. She has described the moment she first saw him with a kind of clarity that never loses its emotional force no matter how many times you hear it retold. Something inside her went quiet, she said, and simply told her that she had found the person she had been searching for. That kind of recognition, instantaneous and wordless, is the type that either lasts forever or burns so brightly it eventually exhausts itself. For more than a decade, it appeared to be the former. It would take years for anyone to begin suspecting it might be the latter. They built a friendship first. He texted her for parenting advice about his young daughter. She listened and genuinely cared. By the summer of 2016, that friendship had become something neither of them could contain or explain away. On the final night of August, standing together at a concert, He grabbed a microphone and asked her in completely unfiltered language whether she would marry him right then and there in Las Vegas. She agreed without hesitation. They drove to a chapel and got married that same night, two people with almost nothing in their pockets gambling everything on each other. Days before that wedding, he had also welcomed a newborn son with a previous partner. Bunnie entered the chaos of his life without flinching and began helping him fight for custody of his daughter, whose mother was struggling deeply with addiction at the time. What that act of commitment meant in practical terms deserves its own moment of consideration. This woman married a man who was barely financially stable, immediately stepped into a maternal role for children who were not biologically hers, got herself sober for the sake of those children, and helped build a household and a family from almost nothing. That is the foundation they poured together, and it was built from genuine sacrifice on her part, not performance or social media content. It was real, exhausting, daily work. Then came 2018, only 2 years into the marriage, and the crack that should have destroyed the entire structure. Bunnie discovered that her husband had been unfaithful to her, and not in the context of a single reckless night. By the accounts that emerged in subsequent years, the affair had continued across the better part of a full year. She has spoken about the devastation of that discovery with the kind of measured, unflinching honesty that only comes from having genuinely processed something and arrived at hard-won clarity on the other side. She described feeling disposable. That word is precise and it is worth sitting with, because it reveals not just the magnitude of the wound but the specific way it was shaped. Being betrayed by someone you chose to trust with your most broken self does not just hurt. It makes you question the fundamental reliability of your own judgment and your own worth. She went back to Las Vegas. The marriage appeared to be finished by any reasonable standard anyone might apply. But they chose to work on it, and years later Jelly Roll spoke about that chapter with a candor that most public figures never find the courage to reach for. He admitted the affair without reservation, without softening language, and without redirecting blame. He acknowledged that he had surrounded himself during that period with people who normalized infidelity and substance use, and that he had slowly reflected back whatever he chose to stand near. He did not offer that as an excuse. He offered it as an explanation, which is a meaningful distinction. Bunnie eventually reframed that chapter in her own words, writing that their foundation had to collapse completely before they could rebuild something that would actually hold. But she also acknowledged that it took years before she believed he truly loved her again. The reconciliation held. And then fame arrived and changed the geometry of everything. Jelly Roll's rise from obscurity to one of the most celebrated figures in American music happened with a speed that genuinely stunned the industry. #1 songs, sold-out arenas, award show trophies, and a redemption narrative so compelling that it functioned almost like mythology. The man who had been incarcerated in his youth, who had battled addiction, who had made catastrophic mistakes and openly admitted every single one of them, suddenly had the entire country cheering for him. His story felt like proof that transformation was possible, and people loved him ferociously for it. Meanwhile, Bunnie was not standing still. She launched a podcast that grew into a genuinely substantial media enterprise, accumulating well over 1 million downloads per month and reaching the top of the comedy charts. She was no longer the woman waiting quietly at home for her husband to come back from the road. She had built her own audience, her own income, her own independent platform and professional identity. These are not developments that weaken a marriage on their own, but they do change the internal balance of a partnership in ways that require active and conscious attention to navigate. He was constantly on tour. She was building a world that no longer needed him at its center. Two people who had once shared the cramped and intimate space of a single van were now living lives so expansive and so separate that the distance between them could no longer be explained away by scheduling or geography. Somewhere inside that space, the question of who they were to each other began to lose the answer it had always come with automatically. There is something else that has been largely overlooked in the conversation about this divorce. Something that Jelly Roll said publicly in the spring of 2025 that lands with enormous weight in hindsight. He sat down for an interview and stated plainly that any couple who believes marriage is a one-size-fits-all arrangement is eventually going to end up divorced. He said that any relationship trying to fit itself into a standard mold would crack within a decade. On the surface, he was speaking broadly. In retrospect, he was describing his own home from the inside. That is the closest thing we have to a direct admission, and it is a haunting one, because it tells us the pressure had been building long before the paperwork was filed. Bunnie herself had spoken openly for years about the fact that their marriage operated by a different set of rules than most. She described their bond as free rather than open, and she made clear that their version of commitment looked nothing like the conventional picture that the word marriage tends to summon. For many years, that arrangement was described as the secret to their longevity. It gave them room to be individuals within the relationship without the suffocating pressure of conformity. But there is a particular kind of irony buried in that framing, because freedom and distance are not always distinguishable from the outside, and sometimes not from the inside either. What makes this ending genuinely difficult to sit with is not simply that they divorced. People who have loved each other deeply get divorced every single day, and it is not a moral failure. What makes it difficult is the timeline of what they were doing in the months immediately before the separation. 4 years, they had been trying to have a child together. She had spoken with painful honesty about blocked tubes, about fertility losses she grieved privately, about being forced into a medically induced menopause after a serious reaction to treatment. This was not a casual wish. It was a sustained, costly, emotionally devastating battle fought almost entirely away from public view. And in the early months of 2026, they announced with visible joy that they had found a surrogate and were preparing to welcome twins, using her eggs and his biological contribution, finally bringing the family they had always wanted into the world. They stood together at award shows and thanked each other through tears that did not look performed. And then, within a matter of weeks or months, that same man sat down with an attorney and quietly wrote the 9th of May as the day their marriage had ended. The surrogate arrangement, based on available information, did not proceed. No further public updates have emerged. That silence speaks volumes, even if no one involved has chosen to fill it. Where does all of this leave the two of them now? By every available indication, they are navigating this ending with the same quiet, determined dignity that they brought to every other crisis they survived together. He has returned to touring. She has returned to rebuilding herself in public, posting about reclaiming her own sparkle, stepping back into her own spotlight as a woman who has never allowed herself to be fully defined by any single relationship, even one as significant as this. They still share the children they raised together, and that particular connection does not dissolve with the legal paperwork. What remains striking is the absence of ugliness. There were no leaked messages, no public accusations, no social media warfare. Two people who met as strangers in a Las Vegas venue, who survived infidelity and poverty and the disorienting pressure of sudden fame, who fought for children and grieved losses and rebuilt trust from rubble, simply looked at each other and arrived at the conclusion that love can sometimes mean knowing when to let go. After everything they walked through together, that quiet may have been the most honest and generous gift either of them had left to offer. At 41, Jelly Roll has not delivered a dramatic confession or a tidy explanation. What he has done, across years of interviews and honest conversations and the unmistakable evidence of his own choices, is tell us exactly what happened, piece by piece, in plain language. A marriage shaped by unusual freedom gradually became a marriage shaped by growing distance. Two people who had survived everything eventually found something they could not survive together, and the most they were willing to say about it to the rest of us was that it was mutual and private and theirs alone. Perhaps in a world that demanded so much of them so publicly for so long, keeping something for themselves was the most reasonable thing they could have possibly done.